Hello, my name is Michael Cropsey, and today I'm going to do a presentation and a demo concerning API security. And according to a study by Akamai, in 2024, 84% of organizations experienced an API incident. 84%. And what I'm going to do and try to bring across in this presentation is how to properly defend against those type of vulnerabilities. I'm going to break the presentation up into talking about API infrastructure, the vulnerabilities that go with that, and protective measures you can take to defend yourself against API vulnerabilities. Let's start off. APIs account for 71% of all internet traffic. That's a lot. And if you actually look at different studies, this study was done by Imperva. There are some studies that actually have a significantly higher number, some a little lower. All that matters is the concept that a lot of traffic is API driven now on the internet. Also, according to Gartner, APIs are now the #1 attack vector. Organizations, a lot of times they are not prepared for this. They don't even know what kind of APIs that they have that are exposed on the internet. According to another study by Akamai, only 27% know their actual API footprint. Now, that means 73% do not know. You can't protect what you don't see. You can't defend and protect against things you don't even know exist. So that creates a perfect storm where all three, you're talking about traffic volume, attack surface, visibility gap, that all combines into a lot of possible API exposure. The breach, usually they occur in a few different steps. Usually attackers, they'll do a discovery process using some type of tool to find unprotected APIs. They'll then find those vulnerabilities, exploit them to grab sensitive information, possibly do a privilege escalation, maybe insert themselves as an admin into your product. The damage, well, we've heard of millions of dollars. You've all heard of breaches that have affected and had large financial consequences, but those consequences can pale compared to the damage to your reputation, your organization's reputation. Some things sometimes take forever to be recovered, and quite frankly, damage to your reputation might never be fully recovered. As we talked about, modern apps do depend a lot on APIs. So some of the APIs you may have heard about, REST API. I know I've used this to interface with network devices, automate configuration, grab monitoring information from them. APIs are also used to exchange confidential information. When I used to one company I worked with insurance companies, and those insurance companies would use APIs on our custom written app to exchange benefit information. They were properly secured through IPsec tunnel. But still, you're talking a lot of risk involved in not having the actual APIs protected. A lot of confidential information on the internet that gets exchanged via the use of APIs. Some of the things you don't see in the background, you may be running some Kubernetes applications, which are container applications that are used quite a bit by developers nowadays. These things spring up sometimes out of nowhere in organizations. A lot of times the APIs are not well documented. Some APIs that you may have heard of on this are gRPC. And there's also the APIs you may have even forgotten about, such as SOAP, legacy APIs. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is this. APIs are many times used to exchange key information, private information. Also, they're used to control devices, automate configuration, something you definitely want protected. So no matter what type of API you're using, whether it be REST, SOAP, or something in between, the data needs to be secured and protected. And the way to do that is through some type of API solution, API product solution. Some of these exist that are what are called directly inline between your traffic, your web page, and the user. They can also be out of band, where some of the products that are out there will do a monitoring only to help reduce things like latency in your web applications. But when it comes time to block, they will interface with something like a SOAR product, an orchestration product, which A lot of vendors have these that will automate doing blocking on the firewall level, Cisco, Fortinet, Palo Alto. You can also use F5 as that device, any type of gateway. And we also have products out there that do full-blown protection. Will protect against things like BOLA, which is very difficult to defend against, and also the #1 API vulnerability on the internet. For doing something to protect against BOLA, you're going to need something that is very schema aware, possibly using machine language to do behavior analysis. There are also some gateway products, API gateways, that do partial protection. They'll protect against things like CRS, cross-origin resource sharing configuration errors. Rate limiting will help prevent DDoS attacks from someone oversubscribing your APIs. They'll do bot management, but that's not really API, but many of these will do bot management as well, trying to get rid of bad bots. Some advantage are Kong, some application delivery controllers, NetScaler, F5, A10. A lot of these products have some kind of API gateway with partial protection built in. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would someone only want partial protection? Well, a few reasons. I know when I used to help do POCs on WAF-based products or API gateways, the security department would do a mandate and say you have to install or implement some type of web application firewall or some type of API protection. And so they had to check that box. They weren't specific on what all you had to protect. They wouldn't say, well, if you have a SQL database backend, you have to have SQL injection protected. They wouldn't do that. So a lot of times they would just say, okay, do I do the simple negative protections for WAF? Yeah, I'll just implement some signatures, box checked, but I don't want to implement cross-site scripting protection or any type of protection where I'm in danger of having some false positives or having to do any type of training or anything like that. As long as it checked the box, they did so. Same thing with API gateways. If you can eliminate or protect against many of the attacks, that might check the box. And keep in mind too, I did mention WAF and I did mention API security. I'll cover more on that in a little bit, but keep in mind, totally separate. WAFs do not protect against API security issues. Discovery, blind spots. We mentioned before how only 27% of companies even know what they have as far as exposed APIs. Well, you need some kind of product to help eliminate that invisibility, something that'll discover and see and find those APIs on your network, those shadow APIs. Now, concerning authentication, when we're talking about authenticating an API website or a user, it's not only authentication that matters. Many API incidents don't happen because the authentication fails. In fact, in one of the demos I do in a little bit, I'm going to be an authenticated user, and I'm still going to be able to steal someone else's information. The reason is most gateways do not do a good job with schema awareness. It's not because the authentication failed, it's because either the authorization failed, the context of what the user, what are they using? What are they accessing somebody else's data that they're not supposed to be? So there's a lot more to protecting a site than just basic authentication. Now, some of the common API threats that we're talking about. There's a list called an OWASP Top 10. Now, keep in mind, this OWASP Top 10, there's a WAF component and there's an OWASP API component. Top 10 in each. And one thing to bear in mind, when you're looking for API protection, keep in mind a lot of WAF vendors will call their solution WAF and API protection, but they really do very little on API protection. In fact, I mentioned API gateways do some, but not all. The WAF vendors that actually showcase their product as an API protection are actually even worse. They might do one thing on the OWASP Top 10 for APIs and call it an API solution. So keep in mind, test your products, POC them, do your research. But some of the things we're talking about, broken object level mass assignment, these type of things, a WAF is not going to protect you against. Excessive data exposure, weak security controls, CRS, cross-site origin resource sharing is usually a misconfiguration problem that allows sites to send JavaScript cross-site and return private information. No rate limits, resulting in denial of service attacks against your API. These are all common OWASP API threat examples. Now, what I'd like to do is demo some of these. I'm going to use my protection that I have in my lab is Kong Gateway. It's an API gateway. It will provide protection against many of these attacks. I'm also going to demonstrate an attack that Kong will not defend against. That'll be BOLA. But first, let's go through how I've got this designed. I've got a couple DNS names hosted on Cloudflare. I have a Cloudflare tunneling coming back to, well, we'll call it my data center, but it's actually my home office. And I have a traffic ingress controller. All this stuff, including the Juice application, is running on a Linux server, and it's running on a containerization platform called Podman. It's very Docker compatible. It's something that you're going to find on Red Hat Linux variants usually. And Juice is actually an application provided by OWASP, open source, that has vulnerabilities built into it on purpose so that you can test your API protection solutions, your WASP protection solutions, and ensure they work and get acquainted with how to configure and tune these. So I'm going to first run a script, run it against Juice. It's going to run against Juice and Juice P simultaneously. You're going to see that I'm going to expose the vulnerability in my unprotected site. When the Juice P comes in and routes through my Kong gateway, you're going to see I am protecting that particular application when I'm running through my Kong API gateway. So let's go into my solution here. I am now going to go into my Linux box here. I have a shell script that's going to run some attacks using some scripting along with curl, things like that. And it's going to run a few of the attacks I mentioned earlier. I will go ahead and narrate those as they are running. The script will run, and then you will see the results. Now, some of this one-off screen, I have a couple different cores attacks. You can see I have a misconfiguration in my application, allowing an origin of a wildcard. That is exposed in my unprotected site, but you'll notice my Kong gateway will sense that, rewrite the header, and make it juiceP.cropcit.com. So that protects their rate limiting, where I'm oversubscribing, maybe pounding a bit on the API solution. I do have a mechanism in there to say, well, geez, if I'm doing X amount, throttle it back because this is not normal behavior. I do have that capability in my Kong API gateway. Bot detection, not an API vulnerability, but it is a problem. In fact, bots will be used to run attacks against APIs as well. So that's why the Kong gateway here is also looking for malicious bot activity. And the mass assignment test. Now this one is very interesting because you can see I'm attempting to create an admin via registration. And you can see it was successful running against the unprotected app, which means I registered myself as a user with admin privileges. Now think about that. You're a new user, you log into some type of shopping application, Amazon, and you're able to exploit a vulnerability that puts you as an administrator to the site. Obviously, that would be very problematic. Now, these are the solutions or the situations where my gateway application, my API gateway, provided protection. Now let's take a look at something that an API gateway alone will not protect you against, and that's BOLA, which I mentioned is the #1 vulnerability listed on the OWASP API top 10. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use some software called Burp Suite. Clear the history here. I'm going to use it. I have this configured as a proxy from my Firefox browser, so all the traffic will go through this and I can see what's going on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use it to inject API commands into my Juice Shop application. And first thing I'm going to do is I am going to go ahead and log in to my site. And I will do so. So now let's take a look at my Burp Suite application. And you can see where I called the API, the login portion. I'm going to click on that. You can see the information, and here is my authentication token. This is going to be, you're going to see something like this for any API application that uses JWT JSON tokens for authentication. This is very common, and you can see everything's kind of hashed out here, but let's take a look and see what's in a JSON token. And right here you can see it's got things like my ID, my user ID, 32,273, my user ID, email, all the password hashed out, all those nice things. So that is my actual token. So now I've got something in my repeater app. I did put some HTML code, a GET request. And notice I am going to try to pull off the basket, what's in a user basket. Typically, this is normal. If you want to see what's in your user basket that you've got in there, you're going to want to make an API call, or the application is going to make an API call. Now, if I go look, what's in my basket? One apple juice product. That's it. Now, if you remember, my user ID was like 32,273. Notice I just got a 1 here. So technically, if I come in here and I submit my token and I hit send, I am trying to access another user's basket. And you can see, looks like it was successful. Let's see what's in the basket. Apple juice. Well, that makes sense. I had apple juice. But orange juice. I didn't have orange juice. I didn't have egg fruit. Well, guess what? I just pulled in somebody else's information. Now, it's only a shopping cart, but what if this was PHI information from a health benefits site or any site? You should not be able to pull other users' information. This is a type of attack called BOLA, where I'm authenticated, but I'm not looking at the right context. I'm not schema aware, and I'm able to actually pull and exploit a vulnerability and pull somebody else's information. Believe it or not, this is quite common. That's why it's the #1 rated vulnerability in the OWASP top 10 for APIs. So going back to my presentation, well, where do API gateways help? They're a popular product. They control traffic. They protect against things like CRS, improper configuration. They do bot filtering. They do JWT checks. They check your tokens, make sure it's a valid token. They do rate limiting, throttling, things like that. They even do bot protection. Where they fall short is there's no object level awareness. As you can see, I was able to, as an authenticated user, to use my JWT authentication token and do a request and access somebody else's data. There's no behavioral insight. There's no machine learning involved. It's just straight static checks. Inconsistent protection. They're relying on, in this case, Kong is relying on things called plugins that have to be properly configured. So there is a possibility of user error. So where does this bring us? Well, some of the products I mentioned earlier, I had listed something like Akamai, Imperva, Salt. Akamai is an example of a product that provides full protection, full visibility. It has tools that will allow you to discover unseen APIs in your environment, shadow APIs, ones you may not know about, real-time risk intelligence using machine learning. And of course, it's flexible. It can do out-of-band monitoring, and it can interface either with another plugin you can download from Akamai called App or API Protector. But it also integrates with gateways, WAFs, SIM products, SOAR products from Palo Alto, Fortinet, Cisco to actually implement the blocking. So it's very flexible and works with a variety of different products. So the three takeaways. As I said before, you can't secure what you can't see. Discovery is the foundation of every mature API security program. That statement says it all. Gateways aren't enough. Use them for traffic control, but rely on deeper object level validation to get real protection. Something like Akamai No Name, Salt, or something like that. Continuous verification. Every company I know of nowadays will do periodic checks to check all the operating systems on their network. Are they patched? All their network devices, are they patched? Do they show any known vulnerabilities? This should be something you'd be doing day one. You implement this. Do periodic checks for unknown APIs. So many times I've actually interfaced with customers that, when Kubernetes was first starting to become popular, you'd be surprised how many security departments did not know that these applications, this environment was in their organization. So there was no security control. APIs were popping up like nowhere. And trust me, they had no idea what was behind the scenes. And you want to make sure that you are continually monitoring and looking for possible shadow APIs to make sure that you have adequate protection for them. Now that's the end of my demonstration. Please feel free to reach out to me and I will answer any questions or try to answer any questions that you may have. And thanks again for watching.